Welcome back to Inside City Hall. There is a great deal of attention being paid to the ideological differences between Republicans and Democrats in this year's midterm elections. What is being talked about much less is the once-a-decade high-stakes battle between the two parties for the right to redraw the electoral map and perhaps control the outcome of elections in Congress and state houses around the country. Here now to discuss the issue of redistricting are Jeff Reichert, the man behind a new documentary called Gerrymandering, State Assemblyman Hakeem Jeffries, who saw his electoral district redrawn after a tough election, and our own Bobby Cuza, whose four-part series on the redistricting process, Crooked Lines, was featured on NY1 this week. Thank you all for being here. This is such a tough topic. And Jeff, I noticed that at the beginning of your movie, you went around and did some what we like to call man on the street interviews, asking people if they knew what gerrymandering was. And what did you find out?
I mean, nobody knows what this is. It's this kind of thing that happens behind closed doors in the sort of allegorical smoke-filled rooms. They don't really smoke in the rooms anymore, but
right.
But people don't really know that this happens, and so they go to vote on election day after a census, and all of a sudden they're in a different district. They have a new set of candidates. The person who's been representing them for sometimes decades isn't anywhere near them anymore, and they just wonder why this happens.
Is it safe to say that nobody really knows what gerrymandering is, but it affects everyone's life in America?
It affects every single voter because we all live in districts, and all districts are bounded by lines.
Right, right. Before we all delve in, let's just take a look at a trailer from your movie so we can sort of set the stage for what we're talking about here.
Gerrymandering is maybe the greatest election scam ever perpetrated on the American people.
In the spring of 2001, he began the process of redrawing his own district, a huge turning point in Obama's political career.
We will keep challenging gerrymandering.
The deck is stacked against us.
Voter discrimination must end.
The myth of democracy is that it's a myth.
America is the ultimate democracy, but you always have to fight for it.
You know, and I have to confess, when I sat down to look at it, I viewed it as homework, like, oh, I got to look at this. But that opening really sucks you in. Why do Americans need to care about gerrymandering? We discussed it a little.
Yeah, I mean, it affects all of our votes and all of our representation. And, you know, we have a democracy. You know, we fought to have a democracy because we wanted to be able to elect the people who represent us in Congress. We didn't fight to have a democracy so a political elite could select which ones of us that they wanted.
When you say political elite, so the politicians themselves are redrawing their own electoral districts. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, in I think it's about 46 or 47 states, politicians solely control the redistricting process.
Okay, and Hakeem, this you are, would we call you a victim of this, or I mean, is victim the right word here? How did this affect you?
Well, you know, in 2000 I was an insurgent, and I decided to run against a very popular long-term incumbent. I didn't win, but I came closer than anybody expected, shocked, I think, the local political machine. And as I was preparing to run again in 2002, the lines were redrawn in February. And I went to bed in the 57th Assembly District.
We're looking at your district right now, just so you know.
That's the district I ran in. When I woke up the next morning, I was in the 52nd Assembly District, a district that I was completely unfamiliar with. Now, I hadn't moved.
Seriously? Like the next morning you were in a different district?
Absolutely.
And you didn't know anything about that?
Well, when the lines came out the next day, the district lines had been moved and shifted over by a block. And it just so happens that the block where my home was located was shifted from one district, the 57th, into the 52nd district.
But so what did that mean in terms of people who wanted to vote for you could no longer vote for you?
Well, what
so
essentially,
you lost votes, or you were going to gain votes from people who didn't know you, or? Well,
what essentially did was make me ineligible to run for any other election cycle beginning in 2004. And in fact, I wasn't unable to run in 2004 because I hadn't moved back into the district. In 2005, my family and I moved back into the 57th Assembly District, and I was able to move after selling my apartment and renting a new one. And I traveled all of 2 blocks in order to get back into the district.
So who changed the line? Who did that overnight while you were sleeping?
Well, you know, the lines are controlled by the incumbent party in the legislature. I'll leave it for others to figure out whether this was just coincidental or whether this was calculated. But many people found it strange that after having run a very vigorous challenge, in the next cycle, the lines would change such that I was cut out of the district. The bigger problem, though, is really the impact that it has on the community. For me, it was just a matter of personal and political inconvenience. I moved back into the district, was elected in 2006. But the Prospect Heights community where I lived was broken into 2 assembly districts. It was really impacted in terms of its ability to seek representation. The same community that had the same police precinct, the same firehouse, the same school district, now had to attempt to seek representation from multiple assembly members.
So it's really, what you're saying is that the voters are victimized more than the politicians
at
themselves.
the end of the day.
Bobby, I do want to get to how this all affects New York, because I know you did a lot of reporting on this, but before we do that, I want to go back to the film and talk about Barack Obama for just a moment, because you seem to be arguing in the movie that gerrymandering really benefited him, in particular as a candidate. He might not even be president if it weren't for the way gerrymandering helped him. Let's take a listen to that.
One day in the spring of 2001, he sat down at a computer with sophisticated mapping software and began the process of redrawing his own district. And that redistricting really was a huge turning point in Obama's political career.
District in 2000 ran across the South Side. In 2002 now, he's got a very tasty chunk of lakefront running from the south all the way up through downtown to an area known as the Gold Coast. And it's a particularly nice district if you plan to run for further office.
Without that redistricting, he may not have been a real contender in that U.S. Senate race.
So he himself just decided, I'm assuming they call it the Gold Coast because there are a lot of wealthy, educated voters there.
It's a very wealthy, white
And he
Jewish
just decided, I want those people to vote for me?
It was a calculated decision on the part of the overall Illinois Democratic Party, because Obama was a rising star at the time. He tried to run for Congress in 2000 and had a similar story as Hakeem. He challenged an incumbent, did very well in the primary, and then his house was drawn out by a block. So Obama said, well, what am I going to do next? I'll go back to the state Senate. They're redrawing the lines. Obama says, well, you know, right now I'm representing a community that's largely working-class African Americans. Those folks are great, but they may not be so helpful for my future political aspirations. So when presented with the opportunity, he took it and turned his district, you know, sort of essentially 45 degrees clockwise.
Now the question is, you know, gerrymandering has been around forever. It's since what, 1812 or something?
Even earlier.
So it is politics as usual. It's built into the American political system. But is it ethical?
No, not at all. I mean, I don't think you should have. You know, would we think it was ethical if Mark Sanchez was the referee at Jets games? That's essentially what's happening in the redistricting process. Is that the people who are most impacted and are playing the game themselves are also doing the refereeing.
Nice use of the sports analogy to make it understandable.